What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It's so funny sometimes when people refer to things in Atlanta as being ITP or OTP, and like when people who are not from Atlanta hear someone refer to something as being ITP, it's like, what the hell is ITP? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So if you're thinking about moving to Atlanta or you just want to know what it's like to live here, of course, feel free to call or text me, email me anytime. I'm more than happy to help. Thanks so much to everybody who has reached out to me asking me about living in Atlanta. My favorite thing to do in the world is help people get acquainted with my hometown. So let's talk about the differences between things that are inside the perimeter and things that are outside the perimeter. And more specifically, what it's like to live inside the perimeter versus outside the perimeter. So firstly, what perimeter are we talking about? Well, in Atlanta, the main interstates that go through the city are 75, 85, which run north and south, I-20, which runs east to west, and 285, which is the interstate that runs in a circle around the city of Atlanta, otherwise known as the perimeter. One reason that we differentiate things being inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter is that you can imagine Atlanta and the suburbs around Atlanta as being like a target. And as Metro Atlanta grows, that growth bubble kind of expands in a circle around the city of Atlanta. And it just so happens that the things that are closest to the city of Atlanta are inside the perimeter, and the things that are on the suburbs are outside the perimeter. But really, what is the difference between the city of Atlanta and living in the suburbs? So many people ask, like, do I want to live in the city of Atlanta where I can find plenty of things to do, or do I want to live in the suburbs where maybe the towns are a little quieter, maybe the schools are a little better, and what's the difference between the two? So let's start with what it's like to live inside the perimeter, very close to the city of Atlanta. One of the closest areas that you can get to the center of that target, so to speak, would be like Midtown or downtown. This is really right in the middle. I think it's pretty close to the middle of that target, and right in the middle of that circle, in the middle of the perimeter. And so Midtown obviously has lots of pros and cons. One of the benefits of living in Midtown is that you're really right there, right in the middle, and there is no shortage of things to do, places to go. There's so many things there in the city of Atlanta, and so much of it is built right around Midtown. That's where you're going to find the beautiful Atlanta skyline, the high-rise. You're going to find those in and around Midtown and downtown Atlanta. And so living in Midtown or downtown is going to feel, very busy. You're going to always have something to do. There's always going to be people around. It's going to be very compact, densely populated kind of city. That's what it's like in Midtown. Whereas in the suburbs, it's not as densely populated. And so many times people ask, like, if I live in the suburbs, will I still have things to do? And the answer is yes. There is still plenty of things to do in the suburbs. Keep in mind that all of Metro Atlanta has 6 million people, and only 500,000 live in the city of Atlanta. That means 5.5 million of that 6 million people live in the suburbs. So what that means is, like, of course, there is plenty of things to do in the suburbs. There are still good schools. There's still good shopping and restaurants, grocery stores. If you live in the suburbs of Metro Atlanta, it's very rare to be more than 15 minutes away from the nearest grocery store or restaurant or shopping. You're still going to be about 15 minutes away while you're in the suburbs. While you're inside the perimeter, or in Midtown or downtown, you're going to be walking distance, 5 minutes from a grocery store or from plenty of things to do, because everything is right there in the middle, compact in areas like Midtown or downtown. Some big lifestyle differences between ITP and OTP are that in the perimeter, living in the middle of Atlanta, it's very rare to need a vehicle. You could live in the city of Atlanta and not have a vehicle, and it would be plenty fine. There's lots of public transportation around and in the city of Atlanta. And then also things are very close. You wouldn't really need to get very far if you're living in the city of Atlanta. Whereas if you're living in the suburbs, you really would have to have a vehicle. anybody who lives in the suburbs and needs to get around has a vehicle. The public transportation, OTP, in the outside of the perimeter, the public transportation is just not very good. Some of MARTA goes outside the perimeter, but it's just not very common. And so you're not going to get the public transportation to go from your house to the grocery store if you live in the suburbs. Really, the best way to do that would be with a vehicle. And so that's really a big difference, is how you get around inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter. And then another big difference between lifestyle inside the perimeter and outside the perimeter is that mostly the people who, the demographic that lives outside the perimeter is like families. That's where, you're not going to have as many people. You're getting away from the hustle and bustle while you're outside the perimeter. And typically people with families don't want to be in the middle of the congestion and the middle of all of the people on top of each other. So typically families tend to live in the suburbs, whereas inside the perimeter, it tends to be people who are not families, maybe young people or older people who are not needing to be as mindful of young children. Another big reason why families tend to live outside the perimeter is that the school qualities inside the perimeter or in Atlanta are just not very good, unfortunately. Most people who have children who live inside the perimeter tend to have their children going to private schools, because the average public school rating inside the perimeter is really close to like a 5 or a 6 out of 10. And while it's possible to have a good experience at a poor school, man, a 5 out of 10 is not very good when it comes to public school systems. Conversely, the school qualities outside of the perimeter in the suburbs tend to be much better. Cities like Alpharetta, where the average school rating is a 9 out of 10, or East Cobb, which is a 10 out of 10. Also, you have suburbs like Suwanee or Duluth, where the average school rating is a 10 out of 10. So you can imagine people who have young children who are wanting to be in areas where the school qualities are excellent tend to live in the suburbs for that very reason. One very big benefit for living inside the perimeter would be for jobs. As you can imagine, in the city of Atlanta, the job market is much stronger than any of the suburbs because there's so much to do. So there's so many things in the city of Atlanta. There are so many more jobs there in Atlanta than in the suburbs. You can clearly see this when you look at the traffic patterns, as during rush hour in the mornings, most of the traffic is on the interstates going into the city of Atlanta. And then during the evenings, most of the traffic is on the interstates going out to the suburbs. So what happens many times is that people with young families tend to live in the suburbs, but work in the city of Atlanta. So this is one of the biggest causes for the super bad traffic that we have here in Atlanta. We really need a much better interstate system, I guess, because again, the school qualities in the suburbs are much better, but the job market is much better inside the perimeter in Atlanta. Okay, let's talk about home values and how they differ inside the perimeter versus outside the perimeter. The biggest difference in the home values is going to be that within the city of Atlanta, there is a much wider range of home values than in the suburbs. So in the city of Atlanta, you can find homes as low as 150 and as high as 15 million, whereas in the suburbs, the home values are more specific. In cities like Alpharetta, the average home value is 750, and in Marietta, the average home value is 500. In the city of Woodstock, the average home value is 400 to 450. So the range of home values is a lot smaller in the suburbs than it is in the middle of the city of Atlanta. And when it comes to like the style of homes, what you're going to find in Atlanta is like condos, or you're going to find older homes. And then a lot of those older homes have been remodeled or modernized, but for the most part, the age of the homes in the city of Atlanta are like 1910s, 1920s, maybe as early as like 1940s, 1950s. But because so much of the growth in Metro Atlanta happened first in the city of Atlanta, obviously those homes were built a lot longer ago, whereas a city like Woodstock, which is on the outskirts of that growth bubble from Metro Atlanta, you have a lot more new construction in cities like Woodstock. Also, Forsyth County, there's a lot of new homes and new growth in those suburbs. But as far as homes in Atlanta, again, lots of condos, lots of homes 1920s, 1930s, lot sizes that are not very big. But again, the big benefit of living in the city of Atlanta is that you're so close to so many things. And when it comes to style of homes in the suburbs, this is a really unique question because it seems so often like the suburbs around Atlanta, like the style of homes are unique to each suburb. Marietta has a lot of homes that are 70s and 80s builds. They do have newer homes, 2000s, 2010, 2020. They do have newer homes in Marietta, but the most common kind of home in Marietta is like 70s and 80s, maybe some 90s homes, very traditional style. Alpharetta tends to have a little bit more newer homes, maybe 1990s, 2000s, very contemporary or traditional style homes in Alpharetta. I would say in areas like Forsyth County, which again is outside the perimeter, and there's a lot of new growth in Forsyth County, there is a lot of contemporary style homes, and then there's also a lot of craftsman style homes, because craftsman style is becoming like the popular style home now. We're seeing a lot of those in the areas where there's new construction. So Forsyth County, Woodstock, in those suburbs that are like on the outskirts of the growth bubble, that's where a lot of the newer, more modern style homes can be found. Again, inside the perimeter though, you're gonna find a lot of older homes. Many people have remodeled those homes, but still you really will see that old time charm, a lot of character to those homes inside the perimeter. And then on the outside of the perimeter, more modern style, more contemporary style homes. A common question I get about inside the perimeter versus outside the perimeter is, if I live in the suburbs like Marietta, will I ever need to go to the city of Atlanta? And really the answer is no. It's very rare to have to go to the city of Atlanta if you live in one of the suburbs like Marietta or Woodstock or Suwanee. Most of those cities, maybe even all of those cities, those suburbs cities like Marietta, they have everything that you might need within the city. It's not such a rural suburb or a rural city that you have to drive super far to get to a grocery store or to get some kind of important thing. Maybe if you're looking for some kind of government facility, like to pay for your tags or to pay property taxes. Even though we do most of those things online now, you really don't need to drive to Atlanta for really anything when you live in the suburbs. It's very rare. Unless, of course, you work in the city of Atlanta, then yeah, your employer probably wants you to show up. But other than that, everything is really located within those individual city suburbs. And there's plenty of shopping, there's plenty of things to do within the suburbs. So it's very rare to have to drive to Atlanta if you live in the city suburbs. And a couple more suburbs OTP to highlight. Kennesaw and Milton are really on the outskirts of Metro Atlanta and really have a kind of suburban feel and almost a rural feel. Lots of trees there, lots of land, homes that have big lot sizes. Kennesaw is on the northwest part of Metro Atlanta, and Milton is kind of on the north part of Atlanta. I think it's about right in the middle, north of the city of Alpharetta. Milton is an amazing city, which is really becoming more and more popular every year. Very big lot sizes. Used to be a lot of farmland there in Milton. I think actually it still is a lot of farmland. And then there's new development there in Milton all the time. And then Kennesaw is a much older city, but still has that kind of rural feel. Lots of land and trees there. And Kennesaw really is one of the best cities in all of Metro Atlanta. Now, there are a few suburbs that are right on the line that really border that 285, the perimeter, suburbs like Sandy Springs or Vinings. And one thing that makes these cities so unique is that they're a really good blend of having the Atlanta feel and being super close to Atlanta, but also having a suburban feel. It's a very good mix of the two. Sandy Springs, for example, also has a very wide range of home values. Again, you can find homes as low as $300,000 in Sandy Springs and as high as $5 or $10 million in Sandy Springs. Because there's such a wide range, it's a very good mix of ITP and OTP. And some of Sandy Springs is literally ITP and some of Sandy Springs is literally OTP. And the more outskirt part of Sandy Springs, The parts that are further from the city of Atlanta are more suburban, more like typical neighborhoods with HOAs. And then the more interior parts of Sandy Springs are a little more densely populated. Areas like Hammond Road, right off of 285, those parts of Sandy Springs are great for being able to get around the city very quickly. And that's another big benefit of living in a city like Sandy Springs or Vinings. Vinings is located at the intersection of 285 and 75. So it makes it so easy to get anywhere in Metro Atlanta. When you live in Vinings, you're so close to having interstate access. And that's really a big benefit for living in Vinings. Another huge benefit of living in the city of Vinings is that it's right by the Chattahoochee River. And the Chattahoochee River provides tons of recreation and parks. There are playgrounds around the river. There tends to be people kayaking and swimming, tubing on the Chattahoochee River. Maybe that's not a thing in other parts of the country. Here in Georgia, we call it tubing, which is like you get a big inner tube and you go on the Chattahoochee River and you just kind of float down the river. There are not a lot of like rapids or dangerous parts of the Chattahoochee River. It's a super chill river. Again, you get in a tube and you bring a beer with you and maybe a radio and you just kind of float down the river and you bring some friends. And this is a super common, popular thing for people to do living in Georgia is tube down the Chattahoochee River. Lots of fun, especially during like the mornings of summer times or during the fall or spring. Great activity is tubing down the river. You can find all of those things within 5 to 10 minutes from the city of Vinings. You can get to the Chattahoochee River super easy if you live in Vinings. Some other neighborhoods within the perimeter, inside the perimeter, are Buckhead and Brookhaven. These cities are a little bit farther north of the city of Atlanta, but still have that kind of interior urban feel that you can find in the city of Atlanta. The average home value in Buckhead is about $800,000 and the average home value in Brookhaven is about $750,000. These two cities are one of the most sought after cities in all of Georgia, very popular parts of Metro Atlanta. Some of the main roads that run through the city of Buckhead are Peachtree Road, Peachtree Avenue, and Peachtree Street. And that's really where you can find the majority of the commercial parts of Buckhead. Again, Buckhead has that kind of feel where you're kind of living in an urban feel, but also has neighborhoods with HOAs, very nice communities. But there in the middle of the city, you can find a lot of shopping, plenty of things to do there in Buckhead. And then the same for Brookhaven. Has that kind of urban feel to it, but on the very edges of this city are neighborhoods with HOAs. And so very good mix of urban and suburban there in Brookhaven and in Buckhead. If you want to know more about what it's like to live in Kennesaw, Georgia, click on this video. I'll see you there.